Great to have you all with us today. Thank you very much for joining us to our second Building Digital Capability webinar. I'm going to say a very short introduction. I'm Sarah Knight, I'm Head of Change in the Student Experience team, and more importantly, today's webinar you're going to be hearing from some of the other members of the team. But just before I hand over to Heather and to Lou McGill, who will be leading the session, I did just want to say that these are the faces behind all the names that you've been emailing, for those of you that don't know the team, and to say that we have got certainly Lisa, Alicia, Heather and Shri with us on the webinar today. And these obviously are here as well if there are any queries that come up during the course of the webinar. If you just move on to the next slide, Shri, thank you. So just to give a little bit of overview around today's webinar, I imagine that everyone is joining today to find out more about the work that we have been doing in the Discovery tool to enable institutions to be able to add in and link to their own institutional resources. And this has been something that has been going on in the background with a huge amount of work that Lou and Heather have been leading on. And Lou shortly is going to be talking us through the background, the context, the rationale, and the practical steps in terms of then making use of this particular feature of the Discovery tool. Heather is going to then lead on after that to give an update around how the implementation of digital badges is going, which is now live, and exciting to see that we can now enable your staff and students to access and request a digital badge for completion of their question set. So really pleased to see that that feature is now available. Lisa is then going to give us some updates around the service more generally. A lot of work has been happening over the past couple of weeks on updating and refreshing some of our materials and making sure, of course, that we are taking forward enhancements around the service. And then we're going to lead into some discussion, because one of the important aspects of this webinar as well is to gather your feedback and very much hear your thoughts around some new areas that we may be wanting to extend the service and Discovery tool in. So we will be finishing off with a discussion around that. We're really delighted to say that we have 31 institutions now subscribe to the service, and that number is growing. So it's great to see that we have got this community of expertise happening both across FE and HE around developing our digital capable organisation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Lou, who is going to start talking us through the resource addition in the Discovery tool. So I'll hand over to Lou.
Thanks, Sarah. Hope you can all hear me.
Perfectly, Lou.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, it's great to have a chance to talk about this today, because we've all been working in the background to get this ready for you, and we know that people have been asking for this feature for a long time. So hopefully what I will do is give you a bit of an idea of how it might work and get you thinking in advance of how you might use the feature for yourselves. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the resources in the Discovery tool and how we use them. And a lot of that may be familiar to a lot of you, maybe all of you, but I just want to kind of not make any assumptions about what you know about the resources. And then I will move on and spend a bit more time talking about the implications of you adding your own resources and ideas and things to consider about how you might do that, which is the more interesting bit, I think. So this should look familiar to lots of you, which is what I call a summary carousel. And the reason I call it a carousel is because you can use these arrows at either side of the little list of resources that are shown under the various headings in different teaching sets. So all of our resources are linked to the elements and the headings within the teaching sets, and they are surfaced in two ways for you within the Discovery tool. One way is in the user reports, and the other is in some resource banks, which allows you to browse through. And the difference between those is that in the reports, our feedback from the pilots indicated that we really needed to limit how many resources were delivered within the reports, because there was so much information. There's the feedback and the next steps, things to think about, resources to follow up on, and so we've limited those to a fairly small number that we feel is manageable. And but we also wanted to give people the opportunity to browse. So say, for example, if they identified that teaching online was something they really wanted to kind of work on for themselves, that they could go to the resource bank and look at more resources in the teaching online section at their own leisure, sort of separate from doing the reports. So those are the two ways that we show the resources. And as you can see, when people first see these carousels, what they get is an image, a title, and a summary. And in that summary, we try to give as much information as possible to help people decide whether to click on that and find out more. What I'm just going to say is, if anybody has any questions, pop them into the chat box and the team will monitor those for me, and then I'll try and address any questions at the end. Okay. So the resource banks, again, this should be familiar, but you may not have had much chance to explore these yet. You know, that a lot of people might just be focusing on the reports they get and the resources that are delivered in those. But at the moment, we've got 4 resource banks. We've got the overall digital capabilities resource bank, and that links to both the staff and the student explore your overall digital capabilities question sets. We've got a resource bank for the new students question set, one for the teaching question set, and one for the library and learning resources question set. And once you click into the resource bank, again, you see the familiar carousels with that summary information in under the various headings. So once people get familiar with how we present resources in within the Discovery tool, things should have a familiarity and be fairly attractive looking as well, and encourage them to browse. That's the plan anyway. Hope that's the case for people. So when you click on a resource, you get a bit more information, and this is the kind of information that we put into our resource records. So actually, one of the things to highlight is, although we talk about having resources in the Discovery tool, it's actually, we don't have resources in the Discovery tool. We have resource records which point out to the actual resources which exist outside the Discovery tool. And this is an important thing I'll talk a bit more about later. So obviously we have the title, the summary, and the image, and those are the 3 things you see when you look at those carousels. And then within there, we can add a lot more information. I can hear somebody's mic is turned on there. I'm presuming it's...
I'm going to try and find out who it is.
Not a question. Okay, that's fine. So we have description of the resource, again, hopefully to give people enough information to decide whether or not to click on the link out to the resource. And a lot of the resources, most of the resources, also have a suggested activity or reflection that people could do around that resource, or if they're interested in that kind of, in the area that's covered by that resource. So that's how we at JISC have presented the resources in the Discovery tool. So each resource record that we have in there links out to one resource. Now, and that's the sort of approach we've taken. Occasionally we might have put 2 resources in. You can add other things into those resource records like videos and images, but JISC has tended to keep it fairly straightforward. Information about the resource and a link out to that resource, so not to kind of overload people with too much information in the resource records. And as I mentioned earlier, every resource record links to one or more elements in a question set. So a resource could be linked to 2 question sets. It might be linked to media literacy in the overall digital capability question set, but it also might be linked to the planning and preparation section of the teaching question set. And we do that through tagging and indexing. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And as I've mentioned, we surface the resources through the user reports and the resource banks for each question set. Okay. We do get asked quite a lot, what is our selection criteria for the resources? And we have made these available online on the website in the Discovery Tool Unpacked section. And so there's a little Word document in there that describes our selection criteria. But I just thought I'd briefly touch on some of these for those that have not read that document. So having decided to include resources from a wide range of publishers, it's not just JISC resources. So obviously, you know, national bodies in the sectors, educational institutions that have produced resources in particular areas, individual academics, networks of educators, and commercial companies, Wikipedia, a whole range of publishers. But every resource record links to resources that have been carefully selected for accuracy, relevance and quality. So we have put a lot of effort into curating this collection, and it's selective, not comprehensive, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And again, one of the criteria we've used is that the resources in there have been are free to use. So although some might need people to register, we've not included up to now any things that people have to pay for. Okay, and in order to prevent that information overload, we've not tried to include everything on a particular subject. We have had to be selective and very carefully selective. What we've tried to do is to work really hard to make sure that the resources link to the questions and the feedback that people are getting, so that they really do feel when they've got their feedback that the resources they can link out to really do follow up and link to the feedback they're getting. That's quite challenging and we don't always manage it, but that's been a principle we've tried to apply. And the other thing is that we tend to link to resources at a fairly broad level. So for example, you know, within one area, if we take information literacy, for example, within that one area, you could hone in onto just copyright. And honestly, you could add 50 records on copyright. What we've tried to do is link to things that look at information literacy at that top level, that then within the resource is broken down into those more specific areas. We sometimes do link to things at a smaller level of granularity, but because we've been quite limited to how many resources we wanted to include, we often link to that top level. So we'll link to a course about information literacy, because within that course they will then drill down into the different aspects of a subject. So I hope I've explained that well enough. And we have included a wide range of formats, and we do have whole courses or sections of a course. We've got downloadable learning resources, videos, websites, toolkits, obviously the GISC guides. It's a great way to point people to the valuable content in the GISC website that's not always easily accessible, and obviously it's linked to the subject that they're interested in at that point. So it's working really well for that. Okay, so hopefully that's refreshed your mind, and I hope it's not just been, you know, going over stuff you will feel you know already too much. But the exciting part is that you're going to be able to add your own institutional records into the Discovery tool. And each institution will be able to add 7 resource records. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about this. The benefits obviously are that you can direct your staff and students to your institution specific content. And in the boxes on the right there, I've put some of the kinds of content that might be. So it might be content produced by you or subscribed to by you. It might be your guidance and support materials. You might want to point people to your training and events. It doesn't have to be static information. It can be, you know, current information like events and things. And also the other massive benefit is that you can link it to your institutional approach to building digital capabilities. So you can use terminology that's meaningful to your staff that you use. You can focus on specific initiatives that you've been working on, and you can support your strategic approaches that you've decided to adopt within the institution. So people will still have access to all of the GIST content, but your institutional content will augment that, and it will appear first in those carousels. And that's quite important, because it means that when staff get their report or when they go into a resource bank, when they start looking at that carousel, the things that will present first in the carousel are your institutional resources. So that's quite a nice feature. Now you might be thinking, oh no, only 7 resources. And I really wanted to kind of get across today that 7 resource records does not mean you can only link to 7 resources. You can, every resource record could link to multiple resources. So what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is how you will do that, how you will work out how to surface these. But the example on the right here, I hope you can see, this is a pretend record I made up for the University of Poppleton, and I decided that one of the resource records was going to be all our resources in the institution on information, data and media literacy. And in there I've put in several links, and so you can see that you might have only one resource record, but within that you can link out to multiple resources. I have produced a detailed guide with the team, and we have included in there the things to consider that we're going to talk about now, but also step-by-step instructions with screenshots of how to add your resources. So you will have very detailed guidance on how to go about that. But first, the important thing is to decide how you're going to use those 7 resource records. Because I think putting a bit of thought in at this point will really mean that you get the best use out of this feature. So what we're going to do is offer you some ideas, and really these are ideas. It's completely up to you how you use your records. The first idea, I'm going to expand on each of these a little bit more, but the first idea is that you decide to use your 7 resource records to link to the digital capability framework headings, to the 6 elements, and I'll talk a bit about that in detail. Or you could decide to use your resource records to link to different question sets that we have in there. Or you could take a completely institutional focus and map to different types of resource or service at your institution. So you could have a page for events or a page for support teams, access and things. Basically, you can decide on a mapping that reflects your own institutional approach to building digital capabilities. I'm going to talk about each of these, and hopefully in terms of timing I'm doing okay. I think I am, but so if you were going to map to the digital capability framework, well, there are 6 top level areas, and there are 7 records. So you could use your first record to focus on broad digital capability, what it is, what it means for our institution, link to your institutional strategy documents. And then each of the other resource records could be like the example I showed you. Here is all our institutional stuff on information, data and media literacy. So the things to consider about taking that approach is it's quite nice if you want to get your staff and students to kind of focus on those digital capability areas in the framework, and if your work is closely linked to the framework in that way. And it does map very closely, of course, then to the staff and students explore your overall digital capabilities question sets. So you could link to those and surface those within reports for those question sets. And that would be then perhaps most relevant to most staff and students if you took that approach. But it is important to say that the questions the question sets actually link to the 15 sub-elements, not the 6 top-level areas. So if you were doing that, you would have to link this page on ICT proficiency to both the digital productivity and the digital proficiency questions. So that's one way you could look at it. The other way is to map to the question sets. Now, at the moment, we've got 5 question sets, and you've got 7 records. So you could still use the first one for your broad digital capability focus area, and then you could put all the resources that you think might help people who are doing the general digital capabilities set, all the teaching, and you would have a spare set at the bottom that you could use for another approach or for new question sets that might emerge. So things to consider around this are, well, what happens if we eventually have more than 7 question sets? So you would have to think about how you dealt with that. But it would be an approach that would help you consider what you're offering to support each of those different kind of activity areas. What are you offering your teachers? What are you offering your new students? It would be maybe a good activity for you to focus in that way on how you support those different question sets. But each question set has several elements, so you'd have to think about how you map to those as well. And you can map to your institutional digital capabilities, services and resources. So in this one, I've just put up some ideas. Really, it would be very much up to you. So you could you could have a resource record that links out to all the CPD resources for different staff groups. You could link out to student services, the guidance and support that you offer. You could link out to your library and learning resources centre resources and tutorials and guidance. Really, it very much could just reflect what you've got. I think there are some useful things about this kind of approach. If you've already kind of quite far down your digital capability pathway in the institution, if you know as an institution where you're going and what you're doing, and you've already developed quite a lot of resources, that gives you an opportunity to map it to how you see things and your own terminology. It's also flexible because it allows for you to change your records and reflect to new priorities as they emerge. But it might be harder to tag these resource pages to question sets or resource banks, which is how we surface those resources for users. Now, there's a lot in what I've just said, and I appreciate that you haven't had a lot of time to think about this, but hopefully some of what I've said will make sense. You can think about how much you want to include in a record. I think that the value would be to linking to things that already exist within your institution, because that will limit the staff resource in managing it. So if you link to institutional web pages that already aggregate content in a particular area, somebody's already committed to sustaining and keeping that up to date, and all you have to do is link to that page, and then you don't have to maintain within the discovery tool. I think as well, if you're maintaining pages outside the discovery tool, you want to link to that rather than recreate that again within the discovery tool. You can include videos and graphics within a resource. The only limit on that is how it might impact on the user experience of the system, and also things to think about, information overload for your users, number of clicks that they need to take to get to the content, all the stuff that you usually have to think about when trying to get staff and students to look at more information about anything. So I'm going to pass over to Heather now, and I'm sorry if I've gone a bit over time.
Thanks, Lou. Just a quick message on how you might want to access support. So if you're going through and you're adding your resource records and you come across as like a technical query and it doesn't seem to be doing what you expected, what we'd first say is please first have a look at the detailed guide. Lou has put quite a lot of information and detail in there, and I suspect that most questions that you have will probably be answered within in the guide. But if when you go through the guide or it's clear that there's some kind of other issue that's going on, please get in touch directly with us. Contact us using the email address, which is digitalcapability@gisc.ac.uk. Give us as much detail as you can on the issue that you're having, and please include at least one, or ideally more if you can, screenshots of the issue that you haven't. Again, that's really helpful for us to identify where the problem is and how to solve it. So Lou, I think you've got another slide. Yes.
Yeah. So really, I'm not expecting that a lot of you will have thought about this, but maybe some of you will have had some thoughts as I've been talking about how you might use the feature, and you may have already had some plans to that. And do you have any other ideas of how they could be used? Because we'd be interested in to hear how you're going to use them as well. And also, this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions as well now. And I guess some of the team can let me know if there's been any questions come up in the chat.
Hi, Lou. So firstly, you have a comment from Lee Fallon, who says he's very happy that institutional resources are there now too. And you have a query from Kay Renton, who wants to know how often the resources are updated.
Right. In terms of the GISC resources, we're adding to the GISC resources all the time, as you know, as new resources emerge and come, and so decisions are made at that time as to whether we might replace the resources that are shown in the report. So if we added a new resource in a particular area, every time we add a new resource, we will consider whether to surface that just in the resource bank or just in the user reports. A lot more thought has to go into the user reports, because if we add a new resource in, we may have to take one of the existing resources out. So so it's an ongoing process, and you know, we're trying to kind of keep track of things. You know, we're already even though we've not been going that long really, we've already had to take resources off that are no longer live. And I would say if people find any links that don't appear to be live, or if they feel that something has been superseded, we are working on a system that will allow people to sort of suggest resources to us. We haven't quite got that set up yet, but it will be very much open for users to say, look, this is a brilliant resource on digital identity, and we would consider including that, so long as it matched our resource criteria that we use to add resources. So I hope that answers that question. It's ongoing, and it's a sort of evolving, ongoing creature. Any other questions or thoughts? I realise that I've covered a lot of information.
No other questions at the moment, but another. So we have a question just coming from Jenny Houston, who says, can we add our own resources from now, or is it coming soon? Is there any facility for creating a dummy resource so that we can see what it looks like before publishing? And if so, how does that work? And that's with the caveat that Jenny missed the start, so she apologised.
Okay. Hi, Jenny. You haven't missed the answer to either of those questions, so that's not being a problem. In terms of when you can add your resources. We're just doing some final testing on the technical side, so we're hoping probably from next week you should be able to do that, but we certainly wouldn't suggest that you try and do that before having read through the guidance that Lou's produced. And obviously for those people who request to be able to add resources, we will be sending that guidance too. I believe my colleague Lisa might be saying a little bit more about how we'll be capturing that information, because at the moment it isn't a default. So a little bit like those of you, which might be most of you on this webinar, those of you who've already got access to the data dashboards, it's the same kind of principle. We will receive requests in for those who would like to have that feature on their dashboard, and we'll get that added. So as I say, we're expecting to be able to do that for you from next week, providing the tests that we're doing at the moment go well, which we're expecting that they will. We just need to check some final things before we do that, so before we make that available. In terms of a facility for creating a dummy resource, I'm not quite sure what you would, because obviously the resources that are in there are already resources, so you can see what a resource record looks like by just having a look at a resource record that's in the discovery tool at the moment. And I don't know whether or not Lou wants to add to that, so I think it kind of depends on why you're asking the question about whether or not we can help you with that.
I mean, I'm just going to whip back, I hope you don't mind, to this page. So on this page, this is a suggestion of what you can put in. I mean, honestly, this page could be, it can hold 2,000 words, so that's quite a lot of content. So you could, you know, if you wanted to, you could prepare some text for this section here, in this bit here, in advance with your links out, and then, you know, bring that in when you get this feature, which hopefully is, you know, very, very soon. And then what you will be able to do is instantly see what it looks like as a resource record. You don't have to attach it to a resource bank or a report immediately if you want to just check it out. I haven't gone into detail about how you would attach it to a report or a resource bank. That is a very detailed process, and it is it's included in the guide. So for example, you know, you could put a record in there and see how it looks before attaching it to a question set that then your staff in your institution could see. So you'll be able to have a look at it before it goes, you know, before it goes to everybody else.
Hello, you've got some more questions coming in
Okay.
now. You've got one from Adam who asks, can you set up contribution roles so you could delegate resource creation to other departments as appropriate?
Sorry, yes, I think that one's for me, Claire. Yes. Because Lou's done all the guidance on adding the actual resources, but in terms of the access management, that will be coming through myself and colleagues in the main team. So there isn't a contribution role that you can set it. So basically it is, we would need to have named individuals from you, and then we add those individually. So we add that facility individually. We can't do that by department. It would be done on an individual basis. But it's as many individuals as you want. It could be added on there, but given the number of resource records you have, it probably makes sense to keep that fairly restricted, just for your own management purposes, really. Well,
and I would second that, because actually the tagging part is quite complex and will take quite a while for someone to get a grip of. So it's not something that, you know, you could farm out to 20 people and get consistent results from, really. Would you agree, Heather?
I would, and yes, thanks for that response, Adam.
Any other questions?
None at the moment. Just a
Okay.
comment that
Yeah,
a preview like in WordPress would be handy.
I
But I
think
think you've addressed that.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I think what Lou's covered probably sort of answers those questions. Obviously, if you think of other queries during the rest of this webinar, still put them in the chat box. We can still pick them up while we're still here. And I'm sure once you have the feature,
Yeah.
you may well have other questions, and it obviously will be.
Yes.
Hopefully, I think the guide that Lou's put together will answer most of the questions that you have. But if you do feel that there's a question that isn't covered in the guide, again, just get in touch with us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think, Lou, are you controlling the slide? So can you move forward for me?
Right.
Right, so I just wanted to say a little bit about the digital badge feature that is now live and enabled in all of the question set reports that are available to your users. So just to say, these digital badges are provided for Sphere Credly. They are available for all of the question sets, and what these badges, they're completed badges, and they provide evidence that the holder has completed all the sections of the particular question set that the badge is for, and that they've viewed their report. It's not a digital badge of competence. This is about completion. We do have on our sort of like future wish list of things to look at incorporating into the discovery tool is perhaps looking at sort of more layered digital badges, but a lot of thought would need to be gone into in terms of understanding, well, how would that work and how would that evidence be surfaced? So it's possible, you know, we may look at a next tier, but at the moment, the badges that are in there, what they say is this user has completed that question set and has read through their report. If you want to move on for me, Lou. So just to say where your users can claim their digital badge, it's right at the very end of their report for the particular question set that they've completed. Now, the idea of putting it right at the very end is to help ensure that the user has read their report prior to claiming their badge. Obviously, we can't guarantee that. If somebody knows where the claim button is, they could complete the question set and then scroll all the way down to the bottom without reading it. But the idea is that in the spirit of it, the idea is that they have gone through their report and they feel that they've got some kind of sense of what messages are in there and what they can take from it before they claim their digital badge. But it's not possible to get a report unless, as I'm sure you're all aware, if you've used the discovery tool, you can't get a report unless you've completed all the questions. So we know that that user will have certainly completed the question set in order to be able to request the badge. It will take up to 14 days for a user to get the link to their digital badge. I had a query earlier on today from one of our subscribers who couldn't make this call today, and they put in a request longer than 14 days ago and said they're just querying why they hadn't received the badge. So I looked into it because my understanding is that they should have done. And what I've discovered that there's been a little bit of a delay with the automation feature being set up. However, I understand that that was actually fixed earlier this week. So anybody who has completed a question set and requested a badge should be getting that very shortly, and from this point forward will certainly be within the 14 days for users to get that. So if any of you have had that issue, I do apologise, and your badge is certainly on its way. And just the next slide, if you haven't claimed a badge, this is so you know the kind of thing that your users will see. So basically, when they click on the icon to claim a badge, they're asked to provide then their first name, their last name, and their email address, and that's all that they're asked for to do that. They're provided with a confirmation that they've claimed their badge. They can, if they want, download a receipt so they know that when they claimed it. But it's just so that they do have some kind of evidence of claiming the badge whilst they're waiting for it to come. So it's a nice, simple little feature, and hopefully for those people that like collecting digital badges or would find that useful, it's there to use. Obviously, some people don't appreciate digital badges, and that's fine. It's certainly not obligatory. It's a choice by the user whether or not they decide to claim a digital badge. And I think that's from me. Just on the very last slide is, does anybody have any questions about the digital badges at all? I'm going to assume that that's no.
Nothing in the chat.
No.
At the moment, no.
And I'm not sure if I'm handing over to Lisa or Sarah.
Thanks. Thanks, Heather. It's Lisa. Yes, I'm just
hand over to Lisa
then. So we just wanted to share some of the other news around the service. I think in some of the conversations I've been having with some of you, I've already mentioned it, but for those of you who aren't aware, we've recently updated up some poster templates that we had. They're now available from the website, and they're in the engaging users guidance on the discovery tool page. And hopefully one of my colleagues can pop the link into that. And that's really just a suite of templates that you can edit and adapt as you see fit to promote either the tool or any workshops around the tool with your staff and students. So they're there just to use if you think that's going to be useful in helping you with your communications and messaging. We have recently refreshed and updated all of the role profiles. So the question sets are all derived mainly from a suite of profiles which really unpick the sorts of digital practices that you might undertake within a particular role. We have one for learners. There's 8 in total currently, including for researchers, library and information professionals, learning technologists, leaders, learners, as I've said, researchers. We have one new one also coming down the line, which is for research support staff, which is sort of taking a look at the library profile and the researcher profile, doing and picking up on any of the nuances for the research professional role. So just to summarize, we've got we've updated them all with the new URLs linking through to all the new resources on the website. There are 5 that have currently been updated and are available now. There are 4 more to come. So if you do go and have a look and you see something that looks just the same as before, it is coming shortly, and there will be one new one, and that's the research manager professional role profile. That was a mouthful, right? On to case studies. So thank you to everybody who has volunteered or has engaged with us around writing up your experiences so far of working with us on the service and the discovery tool in particular, and sharing some of your experiences and stories. We have 2 new case studies. So you can now see the York St John University and Gloucestershire College case studies up on the website. And I think, yes, Claire's just popped those links in, so thank you, Claire. And if anyone else feels that they have something to share that they would like to work with us on, please do let us know. We would be very happy to do that. So Lou, next slide, please. I just wanted to also flag just some upcoming events. It was great to see some of you at DigiFest, and thank you for those who came to our workshop. We very much appreciated that. We have a few events coming up over the next couple of months. Next week, we have the Student Experience Experts meeting. That's a community that's been running for a very large number of years now to engage with us around all the innovation work that comes out of the student experience team. Our next event, as I say, is next Thursday, running in Birmingham. The registration is still open, and if some of you would like to join us, that would be wonderful. The link to the registration form is there. And Sarah's just mentioned, yes, that the registration closes on Monday. So if you do want to join us, please do it. Please register soon. And we will be running a session around the digital capability work. We have a workshop which is exploring some of the materials, including the curriculum confidence materials. We have some games. So yes, do come and join us. Our next Community of Practice event is running on the 14th of May. Hopefully you've had the email updates about that already. We're delighted to be working with the UCL Institute of Education and the Blended Learning Environment to put this next event on. So it's happening in London. You have 2 priority places per institution, so please do take those up. It's a wonderful time to come together, hear about what everyone's doing in the sector, and to share experiences. We have an event page now up, and the registration form is now available. That just went up in the last couple of days. So I'll email the list, but please do register and join us if you can. We will be asking for any volunteers to present at our session. We usually offer we have 2 Pechakucha strands running throughout the day, and they have been, it's a really great way of just in a very sort of short, snappy way, sharing some of the exciting things that you're doing. And I know in the conversations I've been having with some of you the last couple of weeks that there's a lot going on. So when you register, you'll be asked if you'd like to volunteer, and please do so. And finally, our Change Agent Network Conference is happening on the 29th and 30th of May at the Open University. So that's just really sharing all the experiences of the students as Change Agents Network work, and yeah, we would look forward to seeing you there too. And finally, Lou, please. So we also wanted to use this opportunity to gather some of your thoughts and voices around priorities going forwards. Obviously, we can't guarantee that everyone's requirements we can act on immediately or at all, but we have a whole process that we're putting in place to gather those requirements in the first instance, so that we can take those through a prioritization process where we look at things like, the desirability, but also the feasibility of any requirement. So we have a few questions that we'd like to ask you, and we've pulled together some polls, and hopefully Shri will be able to put the first one up. So we're hoping to add at least one additional question set for the start of next academic year, and we would be interested to know what your priorities might be around those question sets. So we've put a few options in there for you to consider. The research option, professional staff and leaders questions are obviously more aligned to the sorts of questions we currently have in, which are focused around particular roles and digital practices that relate in particular to those roles. But we also had some conversations around whether the new accessibility legislation might prove a useful point for you to get your staff thinking and engaging with some questions around how they're currently using digital in that way. So if you can all vote, and then hopefully we can share the results of that to everybody. Oh, fabulous. Okay, that's really interesting. And that I think will feed through very nicely into our decision making. So, and also leads nicely onto the next poll. So if you do feel that accessibility is a priority, which it looks like from this group, certainly it is, let us know if this is a priority for you at the moment with a yes or no answer, which I think has already been answered in the previous poll, but just to double check. We'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then if Shri, you can share the results for me. Okay, so that's quite a strong steer. Thank you, that's really helpful. So just to focus a little bit down on the possibility of a question set around accessibility, who would you see the audience being for those accessibility questions? Predominantly for staff only, for students only, or for both? Where would your priorities be at the moment? And Shri, if we can see the results of that. Ah, we have a deadlock. We have a tie. Oh no, we don't. Well, we'd have a tie for staff and we have a tie for both. So I think what we're seeing is that nobody sees the students necessarily bring the priority for this at the moment, which does align with our thinking so far. So that's good news. But there's maybe some rationale for having them for both. And finally, so we'd also be really interested to know why. So if you have voted for staff, can you please add into the text chat any thoughts around why you particularly thought that? And also, if you voted both, and if you could just start the comment with either staff or both, that would help us unpick your ideas around them. And while you're doing that, we'll ask our final question, which is in terms of breadth. So if we were to focus a question set around accessibility, would it be most useful to you to focus around the new legislation, just so that you can get a sense of where your staff, possibly students, are in relation to that? Or would you prefer to see it as slightly wider, covering the wider practice? Great, and let's just see those final results of that poll, please. Again, great, and another strong steer. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's been really useful, and we will continue to do ask you these sorts of questions on future webinars. My final question, and we don't have a poll around it, is just around future webinars, and if there are any particular topics that you would like us to see put on in the coming months, either whether that's around others sharing their practices around particular topics, or whether it's us in the central team leading on that. So please pop any ideas in around that. That would be wonderful. Thank you. So I think if we can move on to the next slide, I think we may be towards the end of the webinar. We are. Okay. So thank you to everyone who's engaged with the webinar. We will save the recording and the slides and share those with you, and we'll also be sharing the well, save the chat obviously, so that we can take all of your decisions and help use that to inform our decision making going forwards. But we'll be back in touch when with any further questions for you. So unless there are any final questions, we'll draw everything to a close, but do pop anything final into the chat.